Hello everyone. Let's talk about the famous Victorian period writer Robert Browning. Robert Browning, 1812-1889. Robert Browning was a pioneering Victorian poet and playwright, best known for his dramatic monologues, psychological insight, and complex poetic forms. His works remain influential in literature, psychology, and philosophy. He was born in 1812 in Camberwell, London, England, and he died on December 12, 1889 in Venice, Italy. He died at the age of 77. Robert Browning knew 5 languages, including English, Greek, Latin, French, and Italian. He lived during the Victorian period, that means 19th century, that is 1832 to 1901. This is the time period of the rule of Queen Victoria. Robert Browning is famous for dramatic monologues, psychological realism, and philosophical themes. Browning's parents are Robert Browning Sr., who was a clerk and a book collector, and his wife, Sarah Ann Wideman, who was a musician. So Robert Browning had access to 6,000 plus books in his father's library, shaping his literary skills. Robert Browning's work was more popular in America than in England. American readers adored his poetry, while British critics often found it too complex. Harvard University even dedicated a Browning Society to study his works. Robert Browning was fluent in Latin and Greek by the age of 14. He briefly studied at University College London in 1828, but dropped out. Robert Browning was almost entirely self-taught. Though he attended University College London, he never earned a degree. He hated formal education and preferred studying on his own. His mother hired a private tutor, but he outplaced his teacher by age 14. And aspired to be a poet from a very young age. He was actually inspired by Percy Bysshe Shelley and Lord Byron. Browning's first published poem, Pauline, or Fragment of a Confession, 1833, which received negative reviews. Only 50 copies were sold, and Browning later tried to distance himself from this work. Browning was a fan of detective fiction. Browning loved crime stories and detective fiction. His masterpiece, titled The Ring and the Book, 1868 to 1869, is structured like a detective novel, with different characters giving conflicting testimonies about a murder. Browning was friends with Charles Dickens, though they had different literary styles. Browning also respected Alfred Lord Tennyson, but there was some rivalry between them. Browning's wife, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, was more famous than him during their lifetime. While Elizabeth Barrett Browning was so celebrated across Europe, Robert Browning struggled for recognition. Critics often referred to him as Mr. Elizabeth Barrett, which annoyed him. Browning's poem Paracelsus, published in 1835, is about a Renaissance scientist's ambition that is well received. His work Sordello, published in 1840, is an obscure epic poem, confused the critics and damaging his reputation. Browning experimented with a verse drama, including Strafford in 1837. It was performed, but it was a failure. Then Bells and Pomegranates, 1841 and 1846, which is a collection of dramatic plays and poems. Men and Women, published in 1855, contained 50 poems, including a celebrated works like My Last Ditches. And in this poem, a duke reveals his wife's murder through monologue. And another poem, that is Porphyria's Lover, where a man strangles his lover to preserve their lover. And Browning's another work, that is Dramatic Persona, published in 1864, included the famous poem Rabbi Ben Ezra. And this poem contains the famous line, that is, grow all along with me, the best is yet to be. Browning's another work, that is Ring and the Book, that is published in 1868 and 1869, contains 12 books. It is a 12-book verse novel based on a real-life 1698 Italian murder trial, 21,000 lines long, and this is his longest work. Browning used multiple perspectives, influencing modern psychological fiction. Then Browning's next work, titled Dramatic Idylls, 1879 and 1880, is a short dramatic narratives. There's another book, that is Ocelanto, published in 1889, is the final poetry collection, published on the day of his death. Browning can be called a dramatic monologue pioneer. A single speaker reveals their psychology through speech. For example, we can see My Last Ditches, Antia del Sato, Porphyria's Lover. Then psychological realism, that is, characters are morally ambiguous and often self-deceptive. This can be seen in the work like The Duke in My Last Ditches, unintentionally exposing his cruelty. Then we can see complex syntax and the unusual vocabulary in Browning's poetry. He used the difficult sentence structures and rare words, making his poetry challenging to read. For example, Sordello was so complex that even Alfred Lord Tennyson struggled to understand this poem. Then another characteristic of Browning's poem is the use of historical and philosophical themes. Browning explored the themes of truth, power, art, and morality. In his poem, Rabbi Ben Ezra, Browning reflects on the themes of aging and faith. Some of the major themes we can see in Browning's poetry include power and corruption, love and obsession, art and the role of the artist, religious doubt and morality, the nature of truth, power and corruption. For example, how power is misused. For example, in the poem My Last Ditches, a noble man controls and kills his wife. The theme of love and obsession. Many poems features possessive or dangerous love. For example, Porphyria's Lover, the speaker murders his lover to preserve their lover. Next theme is art and the role of the artist. Artists appear as tragic or flawed figures in his poetry. For example, Antia del Sato, a painter who laments his wasted potential. The theme of religious doubt and morality. Browning questioned organized religion but had a spiritual themes. For example, the bishop orders his tomb. A bishop is more concerned with his tomb than his soul. Then the theme of nature of truth. Browning used multiple perspectives to show truth and its subjectivity. For example, The Ring and the Book. Each character gives a different version of the same crime. Browning's relationship with Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Browning married Elizabeth Barrett Browning in 1846. She was a famous poet. Their courtship was secret due to her father's disapproval. They moved to Florence, Italy, where they lived for 15 years. And they had one son, Robert Wiedemann Barrett Browning. His pen name was Pen. Elizabeth Barrett Browning died in 1861, and which affected our Browning very deeply. Robert Browning had an odd relationship with his only son. His son, Robert Penn Browning, was more interested in painting than poetry. Though Browning wanted his son to be a poet, Penn Browning became an artist instead. They had a somewhat distant relationship, and Penn later sold many of his parents' personal belongings. Browning's work, The Ring and the Book, established him as a major poet. His influence can be seen in so many other writers. He inspired T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, Robert Frost, and James Joyce. His dramatic monologue techniques influenced modern poetry and fiction, helped transition poetry towards modern psychological themes. Now let's be familiar with some of the most famous quotes from Browning's poetry. First of all, but a man's reach should exceed his grasp, or what is the heaven for? It is a line from Browning's poem, Andrea del Sarto. The next one, Go all along with me, the best is yet to be. It's a line from Rabbi Ben Ezra. The next one, that is, God is in his heaven, all is white with the world. It's a line from Pippa Passes. Browning was buried in Poets' Corner, Westminster Abbey, London, next to Alfred Lord Tennyson. Browning was a vegetarian in his youth. As a teenager, Browning became a vegetarian, inspired by Percy Bysshe Shelley's advocacy for animal rights. However, he later abandoned vegetarianism, believing it made him physically weak. Browning's final words were unusual. Before dying, Browning reportedly said, I am not afraid to die, but I wish I had seen the last number of Cornell magazine. He was eager to read a serialized novel, but it passed away before he could read it.